The stranger rode into Loveland, Colorado on a scorched August afternoon in 1881, his horse so tired it could barely lift its hooves from the dust. And when he knocked on Beatrice Paulson's door asking for water, she nearly turned him away until she saw the desperation in his eyes. She stood in the doorway of her farmhouse, her hand still gripping the wooden frame, taking in the sight of the man before her. He was tall, lean in the way men who worked hard and ate little often were, with dark hair that curled at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. His clothes were worn but clean, and despite the exhaustion etched into every line of his face, he held himself with a quiet dignity that made her pause. "Water is free," she said finally, her voice hoarse from disuse. "For you and your horse both." "Much obliged, madam," he said, and his voice was rough like gravel but gentle somehow. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture so courteous it seemed out of place in her dusty yard. Beatrice watched as he led his horse to the trough by the barn, speaking softly to the animal as it drank. She should have gone back inside, should have returned to the endless work that awaited her, but something kept her standing there in the doorway. It had been 8 months since Thomas died, 8 months of trying to keep this farm running on her own, and she was so tired she sometimes forgot what it felt like not to be tired. The stranger drank deeply from the dipper at the well, then poured water over his head, letting it run down his face and neck. When he looked up, he caught her watching and had the grace to look embarrassed. "I apologize for my manners, madam," he called across the yard. "It has been a long few days." Beatrice found herself walking toward him, her boots crunching on the dry grass. Up close, she could see he was younger than she had first thought, maybe 28 or 29 to her own 26 years. There was a scar above his left eyebrow and another along his jaw, and she wondered what kind of life left those marks on a man. "Where are you headed?" she asked, and then wondered why she cared. "Wherever the road takes me," he said with a shrug. "I am Zachary Armstrong. Most folks call me Zach." "Beatrice Paulson." She did not offer her hand and he did not extend his. There was a moment of awkward silence and then she heard herself saying, "When did you last eat?" He hesitated, and that told her everything she needed to know. "I have stew from yesterday," she said. "It is not much, but you are welcome to it." "I could not impose." "You already asked for water. Might as well impose properly." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile, and she realized with a start that she had made something like a joke. She could not remember the last time she had joked with anyone. Inside the house, she ladled stew into a bowl while Zach stood uncertainly in the doorway, hat in his hands. The house was small but neat, everything in its place, though she knew he must see what she saw every day, the signs of neglect she could not keep up with. The windowsill that needed painting, the floorboard that squeaked. The 100 small things that Thomas would have fixed if Thomas were still alive. "Sit," she said, nodding to the table. He sat, and she watched him eat, trying not to be obvious about it. He ate quickly but not desperately, as if he was used to hunger but had not forgotten his manners. When he finished, he set the spoon down carefully. "That is the best thing I have eaten in a month," he said. "Thank you. It is just stew. Sometimes that is all a person needs." Beatrice sat down across from him, her hands folded on the table. She should send him on his way now. That would be the sensible thing. Instead, she found herself asking, "Are you running from something?" His eyes met hers, steady and clear. "No, madam, just running, I suppose, looking for something, though I could not tell you what." "You have family somewhere?" "Had a brother. He died 2 years back. No one else to speak of." She nodded, understanding that particular loneliness. "I am sorry. And you?" he asked gently. "You wear a ring, but I see no sign of a husband." "Thomas died in December, kicked by a horse." The words came out flat, emotionless. because if she let emotion into them she would break, and she could not afford to break. Left me with 200 acres and more work than 10 people could manage. Zach looked down at his empty bowl. That is hard. I am sorry for your loss. Everyone is sorry, she said, and heard the bitterness in her own voice. Sorry does not fix fences or harvest crops or keep the bank from circling like vultures. There was a long silence. Outside, a crow called, harsh and lonely. I could stay on a few days, Zach said quietly. Help with some of that work. You fed me. Seems only fair I return the kindness. Beatrice looked at him sharply. I did not feed you looking for labor, I know that, but I am offering anyway. He met her eyes again. I am good with my hands, madam. I can fix most anything that is broken, and I work hard. All I would need is a place to sleep and meals. No wages required. She should say no. She knew that. She was a widow living alone, and having a strange man on her property would set tongues wagging in town. But the fence along the north pasture was falling down, and the roof on the chicken coop needed repair, and she was so very tired. The barn, she said finally. You can sleep in the loft. There is a stove out there and blankets. I expect a full day's work for 3 meals. Yes, madam. And this is temporary. A few days, like you said. Of course. But even as she said it, even as he agreed, something in her chest loosened just a fraction, and she realized how heavy the weight of alone had become. The next morning, Beatrice woke before dawn as she always did and lay in the darkness listening to the sounds of the farm waking up around her. For a moment, she had forgotten about Zach, and when she remembered, her first instinct was panic. What had she been thinking, letting a stranger stay? But then she heard the sound of the barn door opening and closing, heard the low murmur of his voice as he spoke to the animals, and something in her relaxed. By the time she had dressed and gone outside, he had already fed the chickens and was mucking out the horse stalls. He looked up when her shadow fell across the barn door and nodded a greeting. Morning, madam. Morning. She felt awkward suddenly, unsure of what to do with herself. For 8 months she had been the only person here, and now there was someone else, disrupting the rhythm she had carved out of her grief. Coffee will be ready soon. Come up to the house when you are finished. Over breakfast they made a list. She told him about the fence, about the chicken coop roof, about the garden gate that hung crooked on its hinges. He listened carefully, asking occasional questions, and she found herself talking more than she had in months, describing problems she had been carrying alone for so long she had almost forgotten what it was like to share them. I will start with the fence, he said when she finished. That is the most urgent. Do not want your livestock wandering off. I have wire in the barn. Thomas bought it last fall before. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Zach just nodded, understanding written in his face, and went to work. She watched him from the kitchen window as she washed the breakfast dishes, watched the easy competence with which he handled the tools, the way he moved with purpose but without hurry. Thomas had been like that, she remembered. Patient and methodical, never rushing but always getting things done. The memory hurt, but it was a softer hurt than usual, and she was not sure what to make of that. By midday, she brought him water and cold chicken wrapped in a cloth. He was working on the fence line, his shirt dark with sweat, despite the relatively mild temperature. When he saw her coming, he straightened up, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. You did not have to bring me anything, he said, but his eyes went to the food with unmistakable hunger. You are working, she said simply. You need to eat. They sat together in the shade of a cottonwood tree, not speaking much, just sharing the silence. Beatrice found it surprisingly comfortable. Most people, when they came around, felt the need to fill every silence with words, usually words of sympathy or advice she had not asked for. But Zach seemed content to just be, and she appreciated that more than she could say. "You have a nice place here," he said eventually, looking out across the fields. "Good land." "It was Thomas's dream," she said. "He grew up poor in Philadelphia, working in factories. He wanted space, sky, something that was his own." "And what did you want?" The question surprised her. No one had asked her that in a long time, maybe ever. She thought about it, watching the wind move through the grass. "I suppose I wanted whatever made him happy," she said finally. "That sounds foolish, does it not?" "No," Zach said. "It sounds like love." She looked at him, this stranger who had appeared at her door less than a day ago, and wondered how he could understand that when her own family had not. Her father had called her a fool for marrying a factory worker with big dreams and no money. Her mother had wept at the wedding, certain Beatrice was throwing her life away, but they had not seen what she saw in Thomas, the goodness in him, the quiet strength. "You believe in it?" she asked. "Love?" Zach was quiet for a moment. "I believe some people are lucky enough to find it. I do not know if I am one of them." There was something in his voice, some old hurt, and Beatrice wanted to ask about it but did not. Everyone had their sorrows, and he was entitled to keep his private. "Well," she said, standing and brushing grass from her skirt. "Thank you for this." "For all of it." "No thanks needed," he said. "It feels good to be useful." The days began to fall into a pattern. Beatrice would wake before dawn and start breakfast while Zach tended to the animals. They would eat together at the small kitchen table, planning out the day's work. Then Zach would tackle the endless list of repairs while Beatrice managed the garden, the cooking, the 1,000 other tasks that kept a farm running. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch after supper, too tired to do much but watch the sun go down. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they did not. But always, Beatrice felt that loosening in her chest, that easing of the terrible loneliness that had been her constant companion since Thomas died. On the 4th day, Zach fixed the chicken coop roof, and Beatrice brought him lemonade to celebrate. She had found lemons at the general store in town that morning, a rare treat, and the tartness of the drink made them both pucker and laugh. "When I was a boy," Zach said, "my mother used to make lemonade on the 4th of July. She would save up for weeks to afford the lemons and sugar, and she would make this huge batch, and all the neighborhood kids would come to our yard to drink it. My brother and I felt like kings." "That sounds lovely," Beatrice said. "Where was this?" "Kansas. Little town called Lawrence. It is not there anymore. Burned during the war. I am sorry." "Seems like everyone has something they are sorry about from those years," Zach said. He took another drink, squinting up at the sky. "My brother and we enlisted when we were too young to know better. He was 17, I was 16. We lied about our ages, wanted to see the world, have adventures." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We saw things no person should see, did things I still have nightmares about." Beatrice set down her glass. "You do not have to tell me this. I know, but I want to. You have been kind to me, and I feel like I should be honest with you." He met her eyes. "I was not a good man in those years, Mrs. Paulson. I did what I was told, followed orders, and some of those orders were ugly. After the war ended, I could not go home. Could not face my mother knowing what I had become. So I drifted. Worked ranches, drove cattle, took whatever jobs I could find. Kept moving because if I stayed still, the memories caught up with me. And your brother, he died at Shiloh, took a bullet meant for me. Pushed me out of the way and took it himself." Zach's voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly as he held the glass. "I think about that every day, wonder why he did it, why his life for mine." Beatrice reached out and touched his hand just briefly, just enough to let him know she heard him. "I am sure he had his reasons. Good ones. Maybe." Zach looked at her hand, at the place where her fingers had brushed his, and something shifted in his expression. "Thank you for listening. I have not talked about that in a long time. Thank you for trusting me with it." That night, lying in bed, Beatrice found herself thinking about Zach's story, about the weight of the past he carried. She understood that weight, though her burdens were different. The weight of grief, of responsibility, of trying to hold together something that kept threatening to fall apart. But for the first time in months, she also felt something else. A small, fragile flutter of something that might have been hope. The next morning, a wagon rolled up the drive, and Beatrice looked out to see Harold Peterson, her neighbor from the adjoining property. Harold was a widower himself, a man in his 50s with grown children who had moved east. He had been making excuses to visit ever since Thomas died, and Beatrice knew what he wanted even if he had never quite said it outright. "Morning, Beatrice," Harold called, climbing down from the wagon. He was dressed in his Sunday best, which immediately set her teeth on edge. It was a Tuesday. "Morning, Harold. I was passing by and thought I would check on you," he said, though his property was 2 miles away and there was no road between them he could have been passing by on. "See if you needed anything. I am managing fine, thank you." Harold's eyes went past her to where Zach was working on the garden gate. "I see you have hired help." "Temporary help," Beatrice said, hearing the defensiveness in her voice and hating it. "Just for a few days." "Beatrice, I hope you will not think me forward, but is it wise to have a stranger living on your property? A woman alone, well, people talk. Let them talk. I am only concerned for your welfare." Harold took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You know I hold you in the highest regard. If you needed help, you only had to ask. I would be happy to provide it." "I appreciate that, Harold, but as you can see, I have the situation under control." Harold looked like he wanted to say more, but at that moment Zach walked over, wiping his hands on his pants. "Morning," he said pleasantly. "Can I help you with something?" "This does not concern you," Harold said stiffly. "Harold, this is Zachary Armstrong," Beatrice said, feeling compelled to make introductions even though she wanted nothing more than for Harold to leave. "Zach, this is Harold Peterson. He owns the property to the east." The men shook hands, and Beatrice could see Harold sizing Zach up, taking in his youth and his worn clothes and finding him wanting. "Well," Harold said after an uncomfortable pause, "I should be going. Beatrice, do remember what I said. My door is always open to you." He climbed back into his wagon and drove away, and Beatrice let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "I apologize if I caused problems," Zach said quietly. "I should have stayed back. You did not cause anything. Harold has been looking for a reason to insert himself into my life since Thomas died. He thinks I need a man to take care of me." "And do you?" Beatrice looked at him sharply, but there was no challenge in his face, just honest curiosity. "I need help," she said carefully. "I cannot do everything on my own, that much is clear, but I do not need someone to take care of me. There is a difference." Zach nodded slowly. "I understand, and for what it is worth, from what I have seen, you are managing this place better than most men could." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. "Thank you. The gate is fixed," he said, changing the subject with the easy grace she was coming to appreciate. "What is next on the list?" They worked through the afternoon, and Beatrice tried not to think about Harold or about the talk that was probably already spreading through town. But that evening, as she and Zach sat on the porch, she found herself saying, "You know, people will assume things about us. I know. Does that bother you?" Zach was quiet for a moment, rocking slowly in Thomas's old chair. "I have been called worse things than a widow's hired hand. If the talk does not bother you, it does not bother me." "I suppose I should care more about my reputation," Beatrice said. "But I find I am too tired to care what anyone thinks. Then we will not worry about it." It felt like a pact somehow, the two of them against the world's judgment. Beatrice liked the feeling of it, the solidarity, even as she told herself not to get used to it. Zach would leave soon. He had said as much from the beginning. A few days, that was all, but a few days became a week, and then 2 weeks, and Zach showed no signs of moving on. The list of repairs seemed endless, and whenever they finished one task, Beatrice would find another. The truth was, she did not want him to go. The farm was thriving under his care in a way it had not since Thomas died. And more than that, she was thriving. She woke up each morning with something like anticipation instead of dread, and she found herself humming while she worked, and at night she slept deeply, dreamlessly, for the first time in months. She knew she was being selfish. Zach was working for nothing but food and a place to sleep, and he had his own life to live. But every time she tried to bring up the subject of him leaving, the words stuck in her throat. One afternoon in early September, they drove into Loveland together to buy supplies. It was market day, and the main street was crowded with farmers and townspeople. Beatrice was aware of the looks they received, aware of the whispers that followed them from stall to stall. She held her head high and tried to ignore it. At the general store, they ran into Martha Henderson, a woman Beatrice had considered a friend. Martha's eyes went from Beatrice to Zach and back again, and her smile was sharp as glass. "Beatrice, how lovely to see you, and this must be your hired man." "Yes, this is Zachary Armstrong." "Zach, Martha Henderson." "Charmed," Martha said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "You know, Beatrice, we have all been so worried about you out there all alone. It is good to see you have found someone to help, though I must say I am surprised you did not take Harold up on his offer. Such a respectable man and his property adjoining yours, it would have made so much sense." "I do not need Harold's help," Beatrice said evenly. "I have everything I need." "Of course, dear, of course." Martha's eyes glittered with malice. "Though you know how people talk. A young widow with a handsome stranger living on her property. Well, one can only imagine what they must think." "Then let them imagine," Beatrice said, her temper finally breaking through. "I am beyond caring what idle gossips have to say about my life." Martha's mouth fell open, and Beatrice turned on her heel and walked out of the store, Zach following behind her. Outside, her hands were shaking with anger and something that might have been shame. "That woman has a tongue like a viper," Zach said quietly. "That woman used to be in my sewing circle," Beatrice said. "We used to be friends, and now she looks at me like I am some kind of fallen woman just because I accepted help from someone who is not from this town." "I can leave," Zach offered, "if it would make things easier for you." "No." The word came out more forcefully than she intended. "No, I do not want you to leave. I am tired of letting other people dictate what I should do. This is my farm, my life, and if I want your help, that is my business and no one else's." Zach smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look younger. "Good, because I was not ready to leave anyway." They looked at each other, and something passed between them, some understanding that went beyond words. Beatrice felt her heart beating faster and told herself it was just anger, just the confrontation with Martha. But she knew it was more than that. On the drive back to the farm, they were both quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. But when Zach helped her down from the wagon, his hands on her waist, the touch lingered a moment longer than necessary, and Beatrice felt heat rise in her cheeks. That night, she could not sleep. She lay in the darkness thinking about Zach in the barn, wondering if he was awake too. Wondering what he thought about when he thought about her, if he thought about her at all. She was being foolish, she told herself. He was a drifter, a man with no roots, no plans beyond the next town. And she was a widow still in mourning, still wearing black, still sleeping in the bed she had shared with her husband. There was no future in whatever she was feeling, only complications and heartache. But when she closed her eyes, she saw Zach smile, heard his quiet voice, felt the warmth of his hands on her waist, and her heart refused to listen to reason. The next day was Sunday, and Beatrice put on her black dress and prepared to go to church alone as she had done every week since Thomas died. She was in the kitchen pinning her hat when there was a knock at the door. Zach stood on the porch, dressed in clothes she had not seen before. They were still worn but clean and pressed, and he had shaved and combed his hair. He looked nervous. "I was wondering if you might want company for church," he said, "if that would not be too presumptuous." Beatrice felt something warm bloom in her chest. "That would be nice. Thank you." They walked to town together, a mile and a half along the dusty road. Zach offered her his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. It felt strange to be touching a man again, to feel the solid strength of him beside her, but it also felt right in a way that frightened her. At church, they sat together in Beatrice's usual pew, and she was acutely aware of the stares, the whispers that rippled through the congregation. But Zach sat straight and dignified, his eyes on the minister, and Beatrice drew strength from his calm. The sermon was about charity and judgment, about casting the first stone, and Beatrice wondered if Reverend Thompson had chosen the topic deliberately. When it was over, several people approached them outside, some offering cautious greetings, others openly curious. Harold Peterson materialized at Beatrice's elbow, his face tight with disapproval. "Beatrice, I must speak with you privately." "Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of Zach," she said. Harold's jaw worked. "Very well. People are talking, Beatrice. Your reputation is suffering. This man living on your property, it is not proper. I must insist that you send him away." "You must insist?" Beatrice felt her temper rising again. "Harold, you are my neighbor, not my keeper. I will thank you to remember that. I am trying to protect you. I do not need your protection." "Thomas would not have wanted this," Harold said, "and that was too far." "Do not presume to tell me what my husband would have wanted," Beatrice said, her voice shaking. "You did not know him. You have no right." She turned and walked away, Zach beside her, leaving Harold standing there with his mouth open. Her hands were trembling, and she felt tears pricking at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of all these people who were so eager to judge her. They walked in silence until they were out of sight of the church, and then Zach said gently, "That was brave." "It was foolish," Beatrice said. "I have probably alienated half the town, the half that was not worth knowing anyway." She looked at him, at the steadiness in his eyes, and felt some of her anger drain away. "Why are you still here, Zach? Really? You could have moved on weeks ago. What is keeping you?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was soft. You are keeping me here." Beatrice's breath caught. "Zach, I cannot promise you anything. I am still mourning Thomas, still trying to figure out how to live without him. I do not even know if I am capable of feeling that way again about anyone." "I am not asking for promises," Zach said. "I am just asking to stay. To help you, to be near you. That is enough." They reached the farm as the sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains. Beatrice went inside to change out of her church clothes, her heart pounding. When she came back out, Zach was in the barn forking hay for the horses. She watched him from the doorway, this man who had appeared in her life like a gift she had not known she needed. "Zach," she called, and he looked up. "Would you like to have supper in the house tonight? I am making roast chicken." His face lit up. "I would like that very much." That evening they sat across from each other at the table, and for the first time it felt less like employer and employee and more like something else. Something Beatrice was not quite ready to name but could no longer deny. "Tell me about Thomas," Zach said as they ate. "If you want to. If it is not too painful." Beatrice set down her fork, considering. She had not talked about Thomas, really talked about him since he died. Everyone in town had known him, and no one wanted to hear her memories because they made the loss too real. "He was kind," she said finally. "That is the first thing anyone should know about him. He was one of the kindest people I ever met. When we first came out here, everything went wrong. The first winter was brutal and we lost half our livestock. The spring planting failed. We ate nothing but beans for 6 months. But Thomas never got discouraged. He would just smile and say, 'Tomorrow will be better, B,' and somehow, eventually, it was. He called you B, only him. I never let anyone else." She smiled at the memory. "He was not perfect. He was stubborn as a mule, and he could not carry a tune to save his life, and he snored like a freight train. But he loved me. He loved me in a way that made me feel safe." "You were lucky to have that," Zach said. "I know. And I was lucky to have had 4 years with him, even though I wanted 40 more." She looked at Zach, really looked at him. "But he is gone, and I am still here. And I am starting to realize that maybe it is all right to want to live again, to want more than just survival." "What do you want?" Zach asked, echoing his question from weeks ago. This time, Beatrice had an answer. "I want to stop being afraid. Of what people think, of what might happen, of my own feelings. I want to be brave enough to take what life offers me instead of hiding from it." "And what is life offering you right now?" She met his eyes, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he must hear it. "I think it is offering me a second chance, if I am brave enough to take it." Zach stood slowly, came around the table and held out his hand. Beatrice took it, let him pull her to her feet. They stood there, barely a foot apart, and she could feel the warmth radiating from him, could see the pulse beating in his throat. "I am falling in love with you," he said quietly. "I think I have been since the first day I saw you standing in that doorway, and I know it is too soon. I know you are not ready, but I needed you to know. I needed to be honest." "Zach," she whispered, and then she did not know what else to say. "You do not have to say anything," he said. "I just wanted you to know where I stand, that I am not going anywhere unless you send me away." Beatrice reached up and touched his face, her fingers trembling against his cheek. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing, and she felt something inside her break open, some wall she had built around her heart crumbling to dust. "I am not ready," she said, "but I think I could be. I think I want to be." "Then I will wait," he said simply. They stood there for a long moment, and then Zach stepped back, breaking the spell. "I should go. Let you get some rest." Beatrice nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched him walk out into the night toward the barn, and then she sat down at the table and put her head in her hands. She was shaking, but it was not fear, not anymore. It was anticipation, the terrifying, exhilarating feeling of standing at the edge of something new. The next weeks passed in a blur of work and quiet conversations, of shared meals and stolen glances. Beatrice felt like she was waking up from a long sleep, seeing the world in color again after months of gray. She caught herself laughing at Zach's dry humor, looking forward to his company in a way that went far beyond gratitude for his help. They finished the major repairs on the farm, and then Zach started on smaller projects, things that were not urgent but that improved the quality of life. He built new shelves in the kitchen and fixed the wobble in her rocking chair and fashioned a gate for the garden that swung smooth and true. In the evenings, they took to walking the property together, surveying the work they had done. The farm was beginning to thrive again, the animals fat and healthy, the buildings sound, the fields ready for next year's planting. "You have done so much," Beatrice said one evening as they stood looking out over the north pasture. "I could never have managed all this on my own." "You were managing fine before I came along," Zach said. "You just needed help. Everyone needs help sometimes." "I was drowning," Beatrice corrected. I was so far underwater I could not see the surface. You threw me a rope. Then we pulled each other up, Zach said, because I was drowning too in my own way, drowning in the past, in guilt and loneliness. You gave me a reason to stay still, to stop running. You gave me a home. Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. Is that what this is to you? Home? It is starting to feel like it. She turned to face him, and before she could talk herself out of it, before fear could stop her, she leaned up and kissed him. It was gentle, tentative, a question more than a statement. Zach went very still, and for a horrible moment she thought she had made a terrible mistake. But then his arms came around her, careful and sure, and he kissed her back with a tenderness that made her knees weak. It was nothing like kissing Thomas, and that was all right. This was different, new, its own thing entirely, and Beatrice let herself feel it without guilt, without reservation. When they pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. Zach rested his forehead against hers, his hands warm on her back. "I love you," he said again, and this time it was a statement, not a confession. "I love you too," Beatrice whispered, and saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying and freeing all at once. "I did not think I could. I did not think I had room in my heart for anyone else, but you made room. You made me want to try." "I will spend every day trying to be worthy of that," Zach said. They kissed again, longer this time, deeper, and Beatrice felt something click into place inside her, some piece of herself she had thought lost forever. That night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, too wired to sleep. Everything had changed, and yet nothing had changed. The farm was still here, the work was still endless, the future was still uncertain. But now there was Zach, and that made all the difference. The next morning, she woke to find him sitting on the porch steps, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He smiled when he saw her. "I could not sleep," he said. "Kept thinking about you. I could not sleep either." She sat beside him, taking the offered coffee. "What do we do now? I suppose that depends on what you want." Beatrice took a sip of coffee, gathering her thoughts. "I want you to stay. Not as hired help, but as my partner, in the farm and in life. But I do not want to rush. I am still figuring out how to let go of the past while honoring it. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense. And people will talk. They are already talking. If we make this official, if we marry, they will say it is too soon, that I am disrespecting Thomas's memory. I need you to be prepared for that." "I am prepared for anything as long as I have you," Zach said simply. "Then stay," Beatrice said. "Not in the barn, but in the house. With me. We will take it slow, figure things out as we go, but I do not want to pretend anymore that this is anything other than what it is." Zach set down his coffee and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." That afternoon, Zach moved his few belongings from the barn to the spare room in the house. It was a small room, barely big enough for a bed and a trunk, but it was warm and dry and felt right. That night, they ate dinner together in the kitchen, and afterward, Beatrice took his hand and led him to the parlor, where they sat together on the old sofa, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her. "Tell me about your dreams," she said. "The things you want for the future." Zach was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I want to build something lasting. I have spent so many years drifting, never putting down roots, and now I want the opposite. I want to watch crops grow and seasons change. I want to know my neighbors and have them know me. I want children someday if we are blessed with them. I want to grow old in one place with one person." He looked down at her. "With you? That sounds like a good dream," Beatrice said. "I think we can make it real. What about you? What do you dream about?" "I dream about this farm thriving. I dream about being happy again, really happy, not just going through the motions. I dream about love that is different from what I had before, but just as real, just as true." She paused. "I dream about you. They kissed, slow and sweet, and Beatrice felt the last of her reservations melting away. This was right. This was good. Thomas would have wanted her to be happy, she knew that. He had loved her too much to want her to spend the rest of her life alone and grieving. October came, and with it the first frost. Zach and Beatrice worked together to prepare the farm for winter, bringing in the last of the garden vegetables, winterizing the outbuildings, stocking up on feed and supplies. They made another trip to town, and this time, Beatrice held her head high as she walked down the main street with Zach at her side. At the general store, Martha Henderson was there again, and this time her smile was genuine if a bit sheepish. "Beatrice, I owe you an apology," she said. "I said some unkind things, and I have been feeling terrible about it. You were right to call me out on my gossiping." Beatrice was so surprised she almost dropped the bag of flour she was holding. "I appreciate you saying that, Martha. And I want to say, seeing you two together, anyone can see that you care for each other. Who am I to judge how people find happiness?" Martha glanced at Zach, then back at Beatrice. "I hope we can be friends again. Real friends this time, not just sewing circle acquaintances." "I would like that," Beatrice said, and meant it. On the way home, Zach said, "That was unexpected." "People can surprise you sometimes," Beatrice said, "for better or worse. Mostly for better in my experience, at least lately." November brought the first snow, a light dusting that transformed the farm into something magical. Beatrice and Zach stood in the yard watching the flakes fall, and she felt a contentment so deep it almost hurt. "I think we should get married," she said suddenly. "Properly married before the year is out." Zach turned to her, his eyes wide. "Are you sure? You said you wanted to take things slow." "I am sure. I do not want to wait any more. Life is too short and too uncertain, and I have already wasted so much time being afraid. I want to be your wife, Zach. I want to build that future you talked about, starting now." Zach whooped, picked her up, and spun her around, both of them laughing in the falling snow. When he set her down, he kissed her soundly. "Then we will get married," he said. "Whenever you want, however you want, just say the word." They were married 2 weeks later in the little church in Loveland, with Martha Henderson and her husband as witnesses. Beatrice wore a simple blue dress, having put away her mourning clothes at last. Zach wore his best shirt, and his hands shook as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Reverend Thompson performed the ceremony, his voice gentle and warm. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Zach kissed Beatrice like she was the most precious thing in the world, and she felt her heart overflow with joy. Afterward, they had a small reception at the farm. Martha had organized it, rallying some of the other women from town, and Beatrice was touched by the gesture. Not everyone approved, she knew. Harold Peterson had made his disapproval clear, and there were others who thought she was betraying Thomas's memory. But looking around at the friendly faces, at the people who had come to celebrate with them, Beatrice realized that the opinions of small-minded people did not matter. What mattered was this, the life she was building, the love she had found. That night, Zach carried her over the threshold of their home, and for the first time since Thomas died, Beatrice slept in the big bed with someone beside her. It felt strange and wonderful, and she lay awake for a while, listening to Zach breathe, marveling at the unexpected turn her life had taken. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Zach murmured back, half asleep, and she smiled. Winter settled in properly after that, snow piling up in drifts, the days short and the nights long. But the house was warm, the larder was full, and Beatrice had never been happier. She and Zach fell into the rhythms of married life with surprising ease, learning each other's quirks and habits, figuring out how to share space and decisions and dreams. On Christmas morning, they exchanged simple gifts. Beatrice gave Zach a pocket watch that had belonged to her father, and Zach gave her a beautiful shawl he had bought in secret on one of his trips to town. They spent the day cooking together and playing cards by the fire, and Beatrice thought that this was what happiness looked like, simple and domestic and real. In January, Harold Peterson stopped by the farm unexpectedly. Beatrice tensed when she saw his wagon, but Zach squeezed her hand reassuringly. "I will handle this," he said quietly, but when Harold climbed down from the wagon, he looked more tired than angry. "I came to apologize," he said without preamble. "I have been a fool, Beatrice. I thought I was protecting you, but really I was just angry that you did not choose me. That was not fair, and I am sorry." Beatrice was stunned. "Harold, I do not know what to say." "You do not need to say anything. I just wanted you to know that I am happy for you, truly. You deserve to be happy, and if this man makes you happy, then that is all that matters." He turned to Zach. "You take care of her, you hear? She is special." "I know she is," Zach said, "and I will. You have my word." Harold nodded, climbed back into his wagon, and drove away. Beatrice and Zach stood in the yard watching him go, and then Zach said, "I did not expect that, neither did I. But I am glad. I hated being at odds with him." As the winter wore on, Beatrice began to feel different, a fatigue that went beyond normal tiredness, a queasiness in the mornings. At first she thought she was just worn down from the cold weather, but as the symptoms persisted, a different possibility began to form in her mind. She said nothing to Zach, not wanting to get his hopes up until she was sure. But when another month passed, and her monthly courses did not come, she knew. She was pregnant. The realization filled her with a complex tangle of emotions. Joy, certainly, at the thought of bringing new life into the world. But also fear, because childbirth was dangerous, and grief, because this was something she had wanted with Thomas and never had. She told Zach on a cold February night, sitting together by the fire. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply, watching his face. For a moment he just stared at her, and then his face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen. "A baby, truly, truly. I think I am about 2 months along." Zach pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "This is the best news, the very best. We are going to be parents." "Are you scared?" Beatrice asked, because she was scared, more than she wanted to admit. "Terrified," Zach admitted, "but also so happy I could burst. We will figure it out together, just like we have figured out everything else." That night, lying in bed, Zach placed his hand on her still flat belly, his touch gentle and reverent. "Hello in there," he whispered. "I am your papa, and I already love you more than I thought possible." Beatrice felt tears slide down her cheeks, good tears this time, tears of joy and gratitude for this second chance at happiness she had been given. Spring came, and with it new life everywhere. The snow melted, the grass turned green, and Beatrice's belly began to swell with their growing child. She felt well, better than she had expected, and she continued to work alongside Zach as much as she could, though he fussed over her constantly. "I am pregnant, not fragile," she told him more than once. "I know, but let me worry about you anyway." Martha Henderson and some of the other women from town organized a quilting bee in Beatrice's honor, making blankets and clothes for the baby. It touched Beatrice deeply, this outpouring of support from women who had once judged her. It showed her how much things had changed, how much she had changed. In late summer, with the fields golden with wheat and the mountains purple in the distance, Beatrice went into labor. Zach rode like mad to fetch the midwife, and then he paced the house like a caged animal while the women attended to Beatrice. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Beatrice thought she could not do it, could not push through the pain. But then she would think of Zach, of the life they were building, of the child that was struggling to be born, and she would find strength she did not know she had. Finally, as the sun was setting on what had been the longest day of her life, their son entered the world with a lusty cry. The midwife cleaned him up and placed him in Beatrice's arms, and she looked down at the tiny, red, perfect face and felt her heart expand beyond what she thought possible. "A boy," the midwife said. "A healthy, beautiful boy." Zach was allowed in then, and when he saw his son, he dropped to his knees beside the bed, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you. Thank you for this." They named him Daniel Thomas Armstrong, honoring both Zach's brother and Beatrice's first husband. It felt right to carry those names forward, to remember the past while building the future. The weeks after Daniel's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings, of learning how to care for this tiny person who depended on them for everything. But through it all, Beatrice felt a deep contentment. This was her family, these two males who had somehow become her entire world. Watching Zach with Daniel was a revelation. He was so gentle, so patient, singing lullabies in his rough voice, walking the floor at 3 in the morning when the baby would not settle. He was a natural father, and Beatrice fell in love with him all over again seeing him with their son. "I never thought I would have this," Zach said one night, holding Daniel while the baby slept. "A family. A home. I thought I was too damaged, too broken by the war and by all the years of drifting, but you showed me that it is never too late to start over." "We saved each other," Beatrice said. "You were not the only one who was broken. I was shattered when you came here, barely holding myself together. We healed each other. Then we are very lucky." The years passed, marked by seasons and milestones. Daniel took his first steps, spoke his first words, grew from a baby into a toddler and then a little boy. The farm prospered under Zach and Beatrice's care, and they were able to expand, buying more land, more livestock. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. When Daniel was 3, Beatrice found herself pregnant again. This time it was a girl, born easily on a bright spring morning. They named her Sarah Rose, and she had her father's dark hair and her mother's blue eyes. Zach was completely besotted with his daughter, and Daniel was fascinated by his new baby sister. The house that had once been so quiet was now filled with noise and life, and Beatrice sometimes had to stop and marvel at how full her life had become. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Zach surprised Beatrice with a gift. He led her outside after the children were asleep, out to the spot where he had first fixed the fence all those years ago. "I have been working on this in secret," he said, and showed her a wooden sign he had carved. It read Armstrong Family Farm in beautiful letters, with the date of their wedding underneath. "It is perfect," Beatrice said, her voice thick with emotion. "Everything is perfect." "I just wanted to mark it somehow," Zach said. "This place, this life, I wanted it to be official, ours." They stood together in the twilight, his arm around her waist, and Beatrice thought about the journey that had brought them here. The loss and the grief, the fear and the uncertainty, and finally, the love that had transformed everything. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Stopping here instead of moving on?" "Not for a single second," Zach said. "This is where I was always meant to be, with you." "I love you," Beatrice said. "I will love you every day for the rest of my life." "And I will love you," Zach said, "in this life and whatever comes after." They kissed under the Colorado stars, and in that moment, Beatrice felt the last piece of her old pain finally let go. She would always carry Thomas in her heart, would always be grateful for the years they had shared. But Zach had given her a new beginning, a new chance at happiness, and she had grabbed it with both hands. The children grew, and more years passed. Daniel became a serious boy who loved to read and help his father with the farm work. Sarah was wild and free, always covered in dirt, always laughing. When Daniel was 8 and Sarah was 5, Beatrice had twin boys, Jacob and James, who kept everyone on their toes with their endless energy and mischief. The house was chaos, but it was the best kind of chaos. Beatrice sometimes thought back to those dark days after Thomas died, when she had been so alone, so certain that her life was over. If she could have seen then what her life would become, it would have seemed impossible. But it was not impossible. It was real. It was hers. One evening, when the children were all finally asleep and the house was quiet, Beatrice and Zach sat on the porch as they had done so many times before. It was autumn, the air crisp and cool, the mountains dusted with the first snow of the season. "I have been thinking," Zach said, "about everything that brought us here, all the pain and loss that had to happen for us to find each other. And I do not know if it is wrong to say this, but I am grateful for all of it because it led me to you." "I feel the same way," Beatrice said. "I would not wish the pain on anyone, but I cannot regret it either. Not when it gave me this." "Do you think Thomas would approve of us, of the life we have built?" Beatrice considered the question carefully. "I think he would be happy that I am happy." Thomas was not a jealous or small-minded man. He loved me and he would want me to be loved. Yes, I think he would approve. "Good," Zach said, "because I want to do right by his memory even as I live my own life." "You do," Beatrice assured him. "Every day you do." They sat in comfortable silence, rocking gently, watching the stars come out one by one. Inside, the house was full of their children, their future. The farm around them was thriving, the animals content, the land fertile. They had built something lasting, something real, something worth all the struggle it had taken to get here. "Tell me a story," Beatrice said, as she sometimes did on these quiet evenings. "What kind of story?" "A happy one, with a good ending," Zach smiled. Once upon a time, there was a drifting cowboy who did not know where he belonged. He had lost his way, lost his purpose, and he thought maybe he would just keep drifting forever. But then one hot August day, he knocked on a door asking for water, and a widow answered. She was tired and grieving, trying to hold together a life that kept threatening to fall apart. They needed each other, though neither of them knew it yet. "I like this story," Beatrice murmured. "The cowboy stayed to help with the farm. Just a few days, that is what they both said." But days turned into weeks and weeks into months, and somewhere in all that time, something unexpected happened. They fell in love. Not the sudden, sweeping kind of love from storybooks, but a slow, steady love built on respect and partnership and understanding. A love that grew stronger every day. And then what happened? They got married. They had children. They built a life together that was better than anything either of them had imagined possible. They had hard times, certainly, because every life has hard times, but they faced them together, and that made all the difference. And they lived happily, not because everything was perfect, but because they had each other. "That is a very good story," Beatrice said. "I think it is my favorite." "Mine too," Zach said, "because it is true." Years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of farm life and family. The children grew and changed, each developing their own personalities, their own dreams. Daniel talked about becoming a teacher. Sarah wanted to train horses. The twins were too young to know what they wanted, but they were full of life and possibility. Zach and Beatrice grew older together, their faces gaining lines, their hair showing threads of silver. But their love did not diminish. If anything, it grew deeper, richer, like wine aging in a barrel. They knew each other's thoughts, could communicate with a glance, moved through their days with the ease of long partnership. On their 10th anniversary, they threw a party and invited everyone they knew. The house and yard were filled with neighbors and friends, with food and music and laughter. Even Harold Peterson came, now remarried himself and genuinely happy for them. Martha Henderson gave a toast. 10 years ago, I was one of the people who doubted this marriage. I am ashamed to admit it now, but I thought Beatrice was making a mistake, moving too fast, dishonoring her first husband's memory. I was wrong, dead wrong. What Zach and Beatrice have built together is beautiful and real, and it is a testament to the fact that the heart has room for many kinds of love. To the Armstrongs, may they have 40 more years of happiness. Everyone raised their glasses, and Beatrice felt tears of gratitude on her cheeks. She had come so far from the broken widow who had stood in that doorway all those years ago, barely able to get through each day. She had survived, and more than that, she had thrived. That night, after all the guests had gone home and the children were asleep, Zach and Beatrice walked out to look at the sign he had carved all those years ago. It had weathered beautifully, the letters still clear and strong. "I want to add something," Zach said. He pulled out a knife and carefully carved below the date, "Built on love, sustained by grace." "Perfect," Beatrice whispered. They stood there in the moonlight, holding hands, and Beatrice thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. The grief and the hope, the fear and the courage, the lonely widow and the drifting cowboy who had found in each other something neither knew they were looking for. "I would do it all again," she said. "Every hard moment, every painful day, if I knew it would lead me here, to you, to this life." "So would I," Zach said. 1,000 times over." He pulled her close, and they swayed together under the stars. No music but the wind through the grass. No audience but the mountains watching over them. They had both lost so much, but they had found each other, and in finding each other, they had found themselves. The farm would pass to their children someday, and then to their children's children. The sign Zach had carved would weather and fade, but the love it represented would go on, a legacy more lasting than wood or stone. They had built something real here, something true, and that was the greatest gift they could give to the future. As they walked back to the house, their steps in perfect sync, Beatrice looked up at the stars and sent a silent thank you to whatever force had brought Zach to her door that August day. She had needed help with her farm, and he had stayed longer than either expected. He had stayed forever, and she had never been more grateful for anything in her life. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, filled with the quiet breathing of their sleeping children. This was home. This was family. This was love in all its messy, complicated, beautiful glory. And as Beatrice climbed into bed beside her husband, feeling the solid comfort of his presence, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The widow had needed help, and the drifting cowboy had stayed, and together they had built something neither could have created alone: a life, a family, a love story for the ages. And they lived it, fully and completely, for all the years that followed, finding joy in the simple moments and strength in the hard ones. Always together, always grateful, always home. The end.